name is Engineer Joseph Joroge, and I was born in 1958 in a small village called Dondo. I went to the primary school in Dondo. After my primary school, I went to Moho High School, and I passed well, and from Moho High School I went to Alliance High School. I went there in 1975 and left in 1976. And after doing very well, I went to the University of Nairobi and pursued a course in electrical engineering. And because of the good grades that I had in my A-levels, Kenya Power and Lighting sponsored me to the University of Nairobi. So I did not take any loan myself. I was a self-sponsored student, and the self was Kenya Power and Lighting. During the holidays, when I was in the university, I used to come to Kenya Power and Lighting to do some internships, and that helped me a lot to learn very deeply about the operations of Kenya Power. So I graduated in 1980 from Nairobi University with a first-class honors degree in electrical engineering. And from then on, I have worked in this organization, rising from a trainee engineer to the current level of the managing director of Kenya Power and Lighting. I have done very many jobs. I started as a construction engineer, that is construction of power lines or project management. After doing project management, then I went to operations and maintenance, where I worked for about 6 years. And that's when I rose to the level of a chief engineer, operations and maintenance. I was in charge of Nairobi, and Nairobi is where the volume of our business is more than half of the whole country. And after doing a good job in operations and maintenance, I was then promoted to be the area manager of Nairobi. And as area manager, I was in charge of all the operations, activities, and business processes of more than 53% of the total customers in Nairobi. And I worked in Nairobi for a considerable length of time, as first as an area manager, then as a regional manager. After then, I moved to West. The West region is very wide. I went to West region in 2003, and I stayed there for 3 years as the regional manager. And there I was looking after the entire Rift Valley, and we have 3 sub-regions there: Central Rift, North Rift, and West Kenya, that is Kisumu. So that was a very different type of region as compared to Nairobi, because it was very wide and it required a different management style, not like Nairobi. Nairobi is more hands-on because I'm very close to the people, but in West region it was a lot of delegation, a lot of people management, and a lot of using people to deliver results. Then after working there for 3 years, I moved back to Nairobi. I worked for 1 year as the chief manager in charge of Nairobi. Then I was promoted to the managing director of Kenya Power. That was 2007. And I worked together with Manitoba Hydro International. Those were contractors. They had been hired to manage Kenya Power, Manitoba Hydro International. So we worked hand in hand, me as a managing director and the Manitoba Hydro International chief executive officer. So for 1 year we worked together, after when I took over now as both the managing director and CEO. So I've worked since that time as a team leader of Kenya Power and Lighting, the management team. And I think within that period we have been able to achieve quite a lot. The broad mandate of this organization is, number one, I want to tell you that this organization has evolved and has changed a lot since I joined Kenya Power. When I started, This organization was involved in generation, transmission, distribution, retailing of electricity. It was also involved in the regulation because there never used to be a regulator at that time. Reforms have been undertaken in the organization. The first reform was to unbundle generation from transmission and distribution, which was done in 1997. That's when KenGen was created. At the same time, a regulator was also created in the name of Electricity Regulatory Board, which has since evolved also to be an Energy Regulatory Commission. So after we separated with the KenGen, Kenya Power's mandate was then transmission, distribution and retailing of electricity.
Okay.
After another few years, that was around 2008, the Rural Electrification Authority was hived off from Kenya Power. So Kenya Power stopped doing rural electrification on behalf of the government, and that authority was created, which is 100% owned by the government to undertake rural electrification. A year later, KETRACO was formed, and KETRACO mandate is to invest in new transmission projects. So Kenya Power has now changed its mandate. It deals with operation of the transmission system, procurement of generation, because we don't generate, we procure, so we offtake power, distribution of electricity and retailing. Those are our main functions as a utility. We also do what we call off-grid generation. There are areas of the grid where we generate power in the far-flung areas of northeastern province, Rodwa, Ramu and so on. And the reason why we do generate that power there is the grid has not extended to those areas, and those people also require the service. So we install what we call standalone diesel generators to serve the various areas. Since I took over as the Managing Director of Kenya Power, we have grown in terms of business portfolio. Our sales have been growing at an average of about 4.5% since I took over. Our profitability has grown. I think when I took over, we were making a profit of about 2.6 billion. Last year, you remember, we made a profit of about 8.5 billion. Then we have seen the number of customers increasing very appreciably. We have been doing an average of 200,000 customers every year, and last year we actually did 307,000 customers. So for the period I have been here, we have added to the grid, to the customer base, over 1.2 million customers, more or less like doubling from what we had. We have more than doubled the number of customers. So that in itself is a very socio-economic achievement, because it means we have been able to access double the population of Kenya, which we were assessing before. I believe that time we were about 15% coverage in terms of population access to electricity. At the moment we are 32 to 35% population access. We have about 2.1 million customers, and for one account we estimate that about 7 people benefit from that. So that is about 14 million. If you divide by about 40 million, it's about 32-35%. I must say that yes, we have done very well in terms of increasing our customer base, done very well in terms of profitability, but we still have very significant challenges in the quality of power that we supply our customers. Although we have done a lot of work, we have had a lot of investments in improving the infrastructure. There are still very many gaps, because as we do the improvement in the infrastructure, we have also been growing in terms of those customers who are connected to power, as I had explained before. At the same time, the facilities have also been increasing at a very high rate. Take, for example, an area like Lavington, an area like Klereshwa. A few years ago, those were single dwelling units. But now, you find where you had one house, we have about 30 apartments. So there has been a very big stress of our infrastructure in terms of the areas that it serves, especially in urban areas, and therefore the quality of power has not been able to meet the expectation. Normally people like talking about blackouts and so on. So when the quality is not good, it manifests itself in blackouts, interruptions of supply, and so on. That's an area where, although we have of course improved gradually, we have had some gradual improvement, because I do remember when we started in 2005, our average response time when you call and when your supply is repaired was about 8 hours that time. As we speak, is about 3.2 hours. So there is a very big improvement. Even at that time, our number of interruptions every month were about 12,000. They have decreased to about 8,000. Yet, we have even increased the number of customers by about twice. So it means on a ratio basis, we have quite improved in terms of the interruptions that we get. However, because the human being in the Kenyan customer has also been changing, the expectations have also been growing. Maybe if you were interrupted for 8 hours in 2005, 2006, perhaps you were as comfortable as when you were interrupted for 2 hours today, because your expectations and your dependence on electricity has increased. As a result of that, it therefore means that the expectations of our customers have also been changing. So we have been chasing what we normally call a moving target. And therefore, in areas of quality of power supply, that is a main challenge. We are mitigating that by a lot of plans that we have in terms of undergrounding most of our lines so that we reduce the interruptions. We are going to automate the system so that we reduce human intervention, and we're also going to do a lot of smart grid installation. Smart grid means a grid which is able to be very conveniently operated and is also conveniently serving the customer. You are able to communicate even with the customer through the grid. That is what a smart grid is about. So once we undertake those interventions, we will be able to improve. The other challenge is vandalism, which is quite new. It is not a very old challenge. We didn't used to have a lot of vandalism some years back, but today as we speak, vandalism has permeated the entire scope of this organization. It is actually one of our major threats to our infrastructure. And although we have had a lot of interventions like community policing, you have seen Mulika Mwizi campaigns, we have had a lot of technological innovations to mitigate, like putting alarms on transformers. We have even used dry type transformers. All these interventions cost money. And therefore what we have been doing is to divert money from doing what we should be doing, like improving the quality of power supply, and taking it to repairs and replacements of what has been vandalized. So if we could, for example, reduce those vandalism activities, we would be able to do much better in terms of improving the quality of power supply. The other challenge, of course, is limitation of resources. Resources are always limited. You are not able to get the resources that you need. And of course, leadership is about optimizing the use of resources so that you can achieve maximum results. However, the investments that we need in the sector require a lot of funds. And those funds can only be generated through concessionary loans. If we go through what we normally call conventional borrowing, it will not be sustainable. So we are happy because the government has an ownership of Kenya Power that facilitates concessional loans from World Bank other multilateral lenders, Exim Bank of China, and those institutions have of late been very, very interested in supporting Kenya Power in its various investments. I think what we try to do as much as possible is to keep the public informed. And the public, as you rightly put it, interacts more with the Kenya Power than any other player in the supply chain. They don't know KenGen, they don't know the fuel suppliers, they only know Kenya Power. And we are tall enough to take up that challenge. We really would want to be passing the buck. So what we do is to also interact with other players in the industry, that is KenGen and other independent power producers. We are on a continuous engagement to ensure that nothing happens that compromises the delivery of power. And time and again, we hold meetings, strategic meetings, which creates smooth coordination between ourselves and those other entities, so that we can be able to deliver quality power and avoid, as much as possible, having to explain to the customer that it is so and so who is in charge. Because once the customer does not get the service, it doesn't matter who is the cause. The consumption in 1 year, we are now doing about 6,800 gigawatt hours. Gigawatt hours is 1,000 megawatt hours. It's a unit that we use for calculating the electricity. If you want, if so want, we can say it is about 6.8 million units of electricity. 6,800 millions of kilowatt hours, because the kilowatt hour is a basic unit of electricity. And that is not significant compared to the size of this country. Our maximum demand currently is about 1380 megawatts, and the total planted capacity is in the region of 1,680 megawatts. That's a very small utility in comparison to other utilities, like, for example, I know Jubilee government give example of Argentina, which is more or less the same size of Kenya. But when you look at the amount of power that they have is is more than 20 gigawatt hours, 20 million gigawatt hours. So we are talking about being just about 1/20th of what Argentina has, and yet it's the same country in terms of size, maybe also in terms of population. So we need to do much more in terms of generation of electricity so that we can have adequate power. We need to do much more in terms of distributing electricity so that we can create the demand and therefore finally get this country move from an agro-based economy to an industrial, at least mean industrial economy. We are doing it together with KenGen because, as I said, we are the off-taker. Hydropower has got challenges of weather changes, so we are concentrating more on geothermal power, because geothermal power is not weather dependent, it's not affected by weather. It is available almost on a continuous basis. So the concentration now is more on geothermal. There is also a little bit of wind. We do have quite a bit of wind in the country, and there are several power plants which are coming on board. There is also a bit of biomass. We do have Mumias Sugar Company as one of the best examples of a successful cogeneration plant. And there are some interested investors in solar. We've not yet really gone the solar way, but that is going to be one of the green energy investments going into the future. What that power plant, the 280 megawatts, is going to do is to displace a lot of thermal-based generation. Instead of using thermal power plants, we'll be using more geothermal power plant, which means our customers will enjoy lower bills because the bills will not be having a high component of fuel cost charge. Okay, regionally, I would say, for example, Uganda is slightly more expensive than ourselves. Yeah. We are more expensive than Tanzania. Yeah. It's on a general basis, we could say that because of our dependence of thermal, we've got quite a bit of thermal. We also have emergency power. We are in that upper quartile. But most of the countries like South Africa and Egypt, you find that there is a lot of subsidy by the government, and that of course brings down the cost of power there. The current tariffs, sustainable or not, I do not want to comment very much about that. But I would want to say that the investment of green energy is going to help in stabilizing the cost of power. And obviously, as it is now, because those green energy investments have not come on board, there will be a tendency of the tariff requiring to be a little bit more, so that we can be able to bring on those investments after when you will see a very gradual, a very rapid decrease in the cost of power. We saw a lot of things in the environment. We saw a new constitution coming. We saw a new country with different people having different expectations. We saw devolution, which means that we are going to have county governments supplementing or complementing the central government. And because of those very high expectations of the environment, we thought it is important that we also align our staff to that expectation. And one way of aligning the staff was actually to change the culture. So rebranding was focused more on transforming the culture of our staff so that they can be more responsive to the needs of the environment. I would want this country to be supplying every Kenyan with the power, very high quality power, with sufficient redundancy, or if you want contingency, so that when power goes off from one side, we are able to get supply from a different direction. And I would want that to be happening automatically, so that customers are not unduly interrupted, but rather they are able to get quality power on a sustainable basis. And I would want to see a situation where power, together with other energy complements, drives the economy of this country.